we are going to break down the jumping ring muscle up, which looks as follows. You're going to jump up through the rings, land in the bottom of the dip. You're going to hold that dip for a few seconds, making sure you are nice and stable, and then you're going to drive up to the top of the dip and finish the rep. With this drill, we're essentially looking for two big things. Number one, we are practicing the transition in a more sport-specific setting than we have been. So far, we've been practicing with the muscle-up ring row. And number two, we are adding a more dynamic element to that transition. So now you are being more explosive. You're jumping up. You're moving with speed through those rings. And if we're going to get a good ring muscle up later on, you need to be able to be dynamic, but then also be able to hit the correct position in the transition and be able to stop yourself and be stable in that position. So those are the elements we're going to practice, and now we're going to talk about what you need to keep in mind if you're going to master those elements. First thing is just the practical stuff. When you are setting up, you want to make sure that the rings are at around about eye height. From there, you are going to bend at the knee so that you end up with straight arms directly underneath the rings. And now you're ready to do your jumping ring muscle up. And as I said before, we are looking to be explosive. We're looking to be dynamic. So when you jump, don't be afraid to be explosive. It shouldn't be an issue getting up through the rings. This is not a strength drill. So once you jump and as you start to move through the rings, we want to keep in mind a number of the elements that we've already been practicing with the muscle up ring row. First one being that we want to keep those rings nice and close to our body as we transition up through the rings. We don't want to do some kind of weird iron cross for the rings then to end up by our side. Additionally, once we hit the bottom of our dip, once we've actually transitioned through the rings, there are some specific elements that we're looking for. First one is those rings are still by our side and we are completely still. Number two is the angle of our arm. We want to make sure that our shoulders are so far past the straps that our elbows are over our wrists. Don't be afraid to get into that position. As we've talked about briefly also with the muscle up ring row, some athletes find themselves being a little bit nervous, whether that's conscious or unconscious, or potentially they just don't know how far out they need to get, and they end up placing their shoulders more on top of the rings, which is one, potentially a place where you'll actually fail the transition, or two, at least a very difficult place from which to do the dip. So make sure to get those shoulders out past the rings, again, so that your elbows are over your wrists. Finally, I mentioned at the start, you want to then hold this position for a few seconds. Make sure you're aware of exactly where you need to be. Make sure that you're 100% stable. And then from there, you can move into finishing the dip and coming back down.